Bueno, muy buenos días para todos.
Okay, very good morning to you all. Welcome to the third webinar of the series of webinars on Urban by Nature Latin America, incorporating NBS through urban planning action. We're very happy to welcome you to the third webinar of a series of 5 webinars that we will have in the program Latin America. My name is Sergio Guren. I am the coordinator of the office here, and we will be performing this webinar with our colleagues from Quito, GES Innovation, the World Secretary, and the Office of South America, ICLE, and Local Governments for Sustainability. We're very happy to see this group of professionals in academia and decision makers that are interested in nature-based solutions. And the step-by-step of the development of this program has been growing. First of all, I'd like to clarify that this webinar is being recorded and it will be published in the channels of the project. During the closing ceremony, we'll tell you where this webinar will be hosted alongside the ones that we have been developing. Okay, so for today, this is the agenda we will have. We will be focusing on mainstreaming of nature-based solutions through urban planning and action. For today, we will have the honor of including the participation of 3 panelists that are in Ecuador, and we will be learning about some territorial experiences that are close to the Ecuadorian territory and the experience developed in the area of nature-based solutions. We'll begin with Maria Augusta Montalvo Cepeda, who is the Director of Environmental Policy and Planning in the municipality of Quito. She is going to share her experience based on the Clever Cities project in Quito as a beneficiary city of the project, and she will be talking about the Green and Blue territorial plan, and how they were integrated in the climate action plan of the city, and how this process has benefited and has also benefited the development of the Clever Cities project in Quito. In second place, we'll have Veronica Narvaez, who is the Director of Environmental Management in the province of Santo Domingo de los Tsáchilas in Ecuador too. And she's going to be sharing the experience there at the local level with urban planning for the conservation and sustainable use of soil. And then we will close with the participation of Nicholas Salmon, who's co-founder and CEO of Yes Innovation, and he's going to be presenting the green infrastructure of the city Esmeraldas, also in Ecuador. Next, please. Great, so I'd quickly like to show you a summary of the Urban by Nature program in Latin America. The process formally began on the 19th of April of this year with an in-person event for the launch that took place in Quito, Ecuador. Then after this, or based on this, we created a series of 5 webinars that are focused on presenting the methodology developed by the project and the node. We started with an initial webinar in June of this year, focused on the second step of the methodology, which consists of exploring. So I'm quickly going to show you the methodology and each of the steps. On August 11, we had the second webinar that focused on step 3, so prioritization. Today is the third webinar, which will be about step 4, being committed and planning. And then we'll have 2 closing webinars to address steps 5, 6, and 7, implementation, monitoring, and replication, respectively, on November 24th and February 9th to close this series of webinars. So just to quickly go over the Urban by Nature methodology, the series of webinars is focused specifically on developing these 7 steps that cover a range of relevant factors in the planning and performance of green and blue cities. So for this, we're parting from an initial step, which is joining, and it basically consists of becoming committed to share experience and learn from equally committed peers to generate a more green, sustainable and resilient future in cities. Then step 2 is, after the first webinar we had, focused on exploring. And on this point, the webinars basically seek to map policies, plans, and existing regulations, identify gaps in approaches and instruments, and understand the personal needs of the cities based on the specific territorial context, and at the same time obtain a map of relevant actors that need to be in the process with an approach of previously identified actors for the co-creation of green and blue spaces with different actors and citizens in general. Step 3 is aimed at prioritizing. In this step, we seek to have the capacity to establish objectives jointly with the citizens and the city. In this step, we also sought to ensure participants can translate interventions based on nature, translated into their own context and based on the challenges and opportunities identified, and also to learn how to prioritize indicators linked to the needs of the city. Step 4 is where we are, or where we're going to what we're going to focus on today, which is becoming committed and planning. On this point, we're focusing on obtaining a commitment and formalizing the planning process. The program seeks to develop the development of a concrete action plan to share it with experts on and understand how to develop funding models for business and governance to establish nature-based solutions. The next webinar in November will be focusing on the implementation stage. And what we seek to do here is to support the preparation for the implementation of the nature-based interventions. And on this point, processes are aimed at strengthening capabilities by facilitating nature-based solution products and services that are adapted to needs and that help to materialize planned interventions at the local level. And finally, the penultimate step is to monitor. What we seek to do here is, of course, to be clear about the prior steps and replicate the methodology with other actors and stakeholders. And as a result, we should also have the capacity to identify where and when it's necessary to make adjustments and decide the best route to take based on the different scenarios proposed. And finally, just to close, step 7 is linked to replication and escalation of the process. As for the replication, what we seek to do is to share the co-creation process and models of funding, business and governance focused on nature-based solutions that have been developed. And to scale those, what we seek to do is ensure that the interventions that initially had a much more communal neighborhood approach focused on a very specific territory can start to be scaled up to the level of the city so they can have a much wider impact on public policy and on social issues in general. Okay, so after this brief introduction, and just to make the most of the time, I'd like to give the floor to Maria Augusta Montalvo Cepeda, who is the Director of Environmental Policy and Planning from the municipality of Quito in Ecuador. She's going to perform a presentation on climate adaptation with opportunities for the long term. Thank you very much, Maria Augusta, and welcome. Yes, thank you very much. A very good morning to you all. We're going to start with the introduction, with the presentation. Can you see it now? Okay, it's up right now. Can you see it? Yes, we can see it. You just need to put it in presentation mode. There we go. Okay, perfect. Yes, as Sergio was saying, a very good morning to you all. It's always important to share our experiences and exchange some criteria on these topics that are of utmost relevance for the development of cities. For us in Quito, within the context of this fourth step, as you well explained, of being committed and planning, it goes through two very important levels, which is to seek the support and achieve the support of decision makers, policy creators, because we need to be committed in the long term with certain objectives as the municipality of Quito and the Environment Secretariat. During this time, we have been taking steps to make sure that there is not a temporary commitment, but as I said, a more long-term commitment with these steps. One of these steps has been to have a climate action plan that has a few central themes for adaptation specified for up to the year 2050, because these kinds of tools will allow decision makers to have a roadmap that can be framed over time that doesn't necessarily vary from one administration to the next. And that's what happens in most of the countries in Latin America. Quito is no exception to that rule, but we have really been emphasizing the work that needs to be done on these kinds of tools. Then another element is to facilitate the design of the action plan, and this contains two fundamental themes to be able to identify the areas of intervention that are of interest to citizens, and in second place, to really identify quite well the opportunities defined for each key actor or needs. So through the project that we have performed, so Clever Cities, but also other initiatives that I'm going to talk about, so public policy in this case, and also the climate action plan that I just mentioned. They've had these three elements that apply to this step or correspond to the step. They're linked to the identification of citizen needs for environmental policy, to be able to generate policies that are adjusted to their needs so that this can end up becoming an action plan, which in the case of nature-based solutions, with the work that we're doing with Clever Cities, that will translate into a guide that will us allow to clearly identify how we can start to adapt our public policy to this concept and provide strategic direction in the form of nature-based solutions. So, which motivating factors have we had in Quito for the adoption of nature-based solutions? And I say motivating factors based on these key elements that have allowed us to start to build instruments for decision making. They go through climate change studies that have been performed, and the data that we have about climate vulnerability in the city, I think is everybody knows what happened to our country during the first few months of this year, which has been over the last 20 years one of the biggest floods. We had also some heat waves. We've also had intense rainfall during the floods. So all of these studies have allowed us to start to show that climate change is present. It's something that we're experiencing on a day-to-day basis, and it has serious consequences for the city. We also have an issue with changes in the use of soil. This is also linked precisely to this event that we had, the Legasca floods, where we saw that large part of this was due to the erosion of soil and also due to urban settlements in areas of high risk. So as a city, we've really been working on that over recent times, in recent times. And then finally, another important element is citizen demand for the protection of natural heritage. So in other words, Quito has a great deal, or has a movement that demands a series of policies to be implemented, which the city has been working on in recent times. Under the same trajectory or path, we have been working on aligning with international commitments acquired by the country and the city towards local policy. In other words, it's possible to find plans in the long term, such as the territorial planning policy, PUGS, and the tree planting ordinance. As I said, the climate action plan has an important component where we are proposing the red, green, urban proposal, and we're also working towards the construction of green and blue ordinances, which is already under the corresponding authority to be able to discuss. And also, as I said before, there has been a demand for the creation of green spaces for recreation, for health, for sport, but also this is now linked to health matters, and there's evidence to show that, and actually we're looking at managing matters of violence, and we can have an impact and advocate for the emotional health of the population by reducing these kinds of behaviors if we have a greater quantity and quality of green areas for the city. There's also a need for areas that provide shadow, and there's also another area, which is the impact of emotional health or mental health. So it's important to have landscapes that will help us to manage emotions and improve them so that we can raise our mood through the enjoyment of landscapes. Under this line, we have defined with great clarity the roles that each one of the actors has, and over time in the implementation of clever cities and nature-based solutions, and let's say this topic of public policy in this area, as I was saying, we have identified there that the generators of public policies are the secretariats, as well as the environment secretariat that I belong with and they belong to, in the Metropolitan Council and the Mayor's Hall. Then you have the local kind of municipalities that, alongside the zonal administrations, act in these territories with slight differences, because the zonal administrations perform planning, so the population has to generate proposals. Financial institutions, without a doubt, advise and support the process, and we require a higher level of research and or investigation and training. The roles and the way that we manage this is a clear example are, for example, the implementation of clever cities in San Enrique de Velasco. Among the new policies, as I mentioned before, we have the Green Blue Ordinance. This ordinance is fundamental for the city. 8 days ago, an ordinance about urban tree planting was also passed, and this will help us strengthen environmental management linked not just to green spaces, but also to water sources as well, water resources. We have anchored it in the promotion of nature-based solutions for better management of protected areas in the Metropolitan District of Quito and the adequate management of residual or wastewater, And as I said before, this ordinance is currently in the process of being approved.
Del arbolado urbano con la que hemos
And it will complement the ordinance about urban tree planting that we have. And these policies are connected to the Clever Cities project,
pilotos, digamos, que nos ha permitido,
meaning that this project has been one of the pilots that has allowed us to have experiences in application for the formulation of these policies. I think I've gone over the time, so I just wanted to say that the guidelines for the creation of this, which would be our action plan and our strategy, or the kind of standards and guides for nature-based solutions, without a doubt, it's aligned with standards, and in co-design, citizens participate, all actors have voice and a vote. So we can anchor this in territorial planning, development, and finally the criteria for prioritization. So many of the ones that I mentioned before. We have a series of implementation strategies and a process with a defined process for citizens, so it can be scaled up and so it can have monitoring and assessment anchored, as I said before, in this climate action plan in Quito, which has a vision to 2050 to be able to define within this context indicators belonging to nature-based solutions that can gather the criteria of the actors. So these are some of the conclusions. First of all, that we need commitment and planning and decisions so that they include the concepts of nature-based solutions, as I said before, in the long term, including the permanent need for the inclusion of that which the population is demanding and requiring, as well as strengthen coordination between different actors by way of different mechanisms that will allow us not just to come together and say what we want, but also to come together and make decisions and to be able to implement in the territory these decisions. Thank you very much. And on behalf of the city of Quito, these are the experiences we have and the way we're trying to come closer to nature-based solutions within the commitments and planning of the city. Thank you very much.
Augusta, muchísimas gracias.
Augusta, thank you very much. Thank you for being so punctual with the time. To the attendees, if you have any questions, we would thank you if you could put them in the tab for questions and answers. We will be taking the questions, and then after the presentation, we will have a space to present these questions and hear the response from the panelists. In second place, we would like to now give the floor to Veronica Narvaez. She is the Director of Environmental Management in the province of Santo Domingo de los Tsáchilas in Ecuador. She's going to talk about public policy for conservation in the same area. So welcome and thank you.
Tienes, Verónica, el micrófono silenciado.
Your microphone is muted, Veronica. Sorry about that. How are you? Good morning. Thank you very much for this space. For us as a local government, it's very important to be able to share our experiences with you and also learn from everything that's going on at the Latin American level and in the world. I'd like to share the topic of local conservation policy in our territory, parting from the fact that we have a structure in which we have the conviction to work towards the environment. We would like to align with nature. We have a legal framework that gives us the faculties as a local government to address the number of topics, including the restoration and conservation of natural heritage, and this is also linked to the protection and restoration of water heritage. So in this line, this administration with that kind of vision to work towards sustainable development, we have now established a provincial environmental public policy that didn't exist before. This is an important umbrella at the local level so that we can establish the conservation, reforestation and restoration of the area, among others, including strengthening climate change in our territory. We have a structure that has allowed us as a tool to make sure that we can plan and coordinate with different sectors at the public and private level, and also with civil society organizations on the table for commitments towards the environment and climate change. In this structure, we have integrated a matrix for diagnosis and environmental solutions based on the needs of citizens through collective action in 2019 that adapts the matrix for the provincial strategy for climate change. And it's also considered to be the social diagnosis, so the capacity of influence that this has in our territory from the perspective of this consulting with provincial governments of Ecuador, and it was also the case in 2019. So in these scenarios that coincide, the table for commitments allows us to establish a coordination structure and a structure for decision making, which is framed within different strategies in different areas. So we have highlighted, as Maria Augusta mentioned, this proposal about the needs of collective bodies that end up becoming public policy and can be transferred in situ to governance. So in our scenario, this is environmental governance, which, as we said, is based on the climate change strategy for our territory, understanding that the challenges due to the climate are of great importance, and we need to maintain these instruments in force. And often in local governments, there is a bias and they come to be of secondary importance. Then the social aspect, we've given great importance to articulated or coordinated work, understanding that local governments 4 years ago were completely scattered or failed to be made visible in the work that was done. Then within the context of responding to the needs for response to climate change, understanding that we are a province or with a high index of vulnerability to the climate, we have a number of risks that we have to cover because they are close to and within populated centers and settlements. As a sector, we are particularly susceptible, quite significantly sensitive, and we have projections about the increase of precipitations and temperature. And these variabilities in the climate and precipitation has certain disadvantages, both for settlements and the risks of these settlements, as well as for our production, health, and the ecosystems of our territories as such. The strategy Provinces of Climate Change gives us a tool that allows us to identify in populated areas the risks that we have and also the level of response that we need to prepare for in both adaptation and mitigation. These are objectives of the provincial strategy for climate change, and I often mention them because they are the basis for all the instruments that we are currently using in the table of commitments under that line of biodiversity. So objective 4 is to strengthen the management of natural and water heritage, focusing on the importance of working with water as a resource, considering other factors of interculturality, intergenerational responsibility, and without a doubt, the gender approach. So now going into our particular strategy, strategic line, we have a strategy that is framed within the policy for climate change, national instruments for climate change, the sustainable development goals, and without a doubt, nature-based solutions at the local level. So at the moment, we have a project in the city that has allowed us to have a little bit more visibility, which we can continue to build in the project. Generally speaking, I'd like to mention that we are one of the most reforested territories in Ecuador. Nevertheless, we know and understand that we have to work with these small remainders and patches that were identified in our territory for conservation. So these small little patches that we need to focus on working on connectivity and complementary work. In this scenario, we created the provincial system for areas of conservation. In the territory, we have 8 areas that are currently part of this system. So here, in the territory of our province, you can identify that we are completely distributed around the territory. So there are 8 areas with different values in the ecosystem that are presented. And something quite important or significant is that our first area of conservation is within the city. Within the faculties of the local government, we have declared that the area, one of the sustainable areas is the Park Kasama in the province. We have other areas that have important ecosystemic value. This one's called Santuario de Línea Silvestre and Isla de los Monos, or Island of the Monkeys. We have areas for conservation that we'd like to highlight because they have certain mammals that are in danger of extinction, becoming extinct, and there are other areas that have different kinds of ecosystemic value under different lines. This is the Manantial water reserve, and obviously we're highlighting the importance of protecting water and the importance of this resource. This is another area that is very close to a populated center. It's the Finca Agroecológica La Floriana, and we have identified a number of fish species. It's very interesting to have them so close to the citizens because these conservation areas, we also use them as instruments for raising awareness about the environment. So all of these areas are being provided with assistance on a permanent basis by students in the city to be able to generate that awareness in situ and to share these scenarios. Just to complement this, we're addressing governance and policies. We have established in scenarios for use of soil that are established for conservation at the local level. In the urban planning or land use plan, we have identified all of the green area and the importance of connecting these areas. And why is it necessary to work on it this way? Effectively, you can see that the area that's been highlighted as an area with risk, with scenarios for the management of the river Tsáchilas, which in this case is quite an important river for the city. We can see here that green spaces have been integrated in local planning. This is a map of the city as such, where you can identify patches and green areas that can be replicated in our process at the provincial level, but also at the local level in the city. And basically within the structure for the implementation of nature-based solutions, we are covering policies and institutional frameworks. We have strengthened a structure that allows us to work jointly. We are also aiming to seek climate funding so we can be more sustainable in financial terms and to be strengthened in this perspective of nature-based solutions. So thank you very much. That's all.
Verónica, muchísimas gracias por tu presentación.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Veronica.
En el chat dejaron un par de preguntas para ti.
I can see that they've left a couple of questions for you in the chat.
Nuestra ronda de presentaciones.
So after this round of presentations, we would like to hear from Nicolas Salmon, the CEO and founder of Yes Innovation. He's going to show us the green infrastructure plan for the city of Esmeraldas in Ecuador. So welcome, Nicolas, and thank you very much for being with us today. Yes, thank you very much, Sergio, for this introduction. Thank you for inviting me. It is a pleasure to be here with you. And regards to our colleagues from Ecuador, I can see we have quite a few, and also colleagues from Clever Cities. Some of you I haven't seen before, so it's great to see you here.
a presentar ese trabajo que hicimos para la
I'm
ciudad
going
de
to present the work we did for the city of Esmeraldas.
Nosotros estuvimos como el operador,
We were there as the operator and the implementing body of this plan, but it was under a mandate of the UNDP alongside the Ministry of Environment in the country, with funding from the Adaptation Fund and the CAF, in a global initiative called Adapta Clima that seeks to address the resilience of coastal cities in Ecuador and in Chile. In our case, we worked in Esmeraldas. It is a coastal city in the north of Ecuador, in the province of the same name. So the Green province, it's a very interesting province
que también está confrontada a una serie
at the natural level, but it also faces a series of challenges. So in this work, we explored these challenges both in the natural part and the urban part, and that means strategic infrastructure as well, which is highly present in the city, and also with the communities, with municipal entities, with different kinds of administrations that exist there, and public policy, public agencies as well. It's very interesting. We found small dots of gold, so an area that is very close to the city and that is not well known. Esmeraldas is also an area of risk, multiple and acute risk of tsunamis due to its proximity to the sea, earthquakes, and recurring floods, because the mouth of the river leads to the Pacific. There is often floods there. There are often floods. There are also fires in the mountains and landslides and other risks due to the multiple infrastructure such as pipelines and electrical plants, etc. So these risks often result in events, in landslides, tragedies, floods, and part of the work in the green infrastructure plan aim to provide nature-based solutions to these risks and to these events. The natural context is a very interesting green area that is also at risk, but it's very close to the natural areas with vegetation. There's also very reduced access to them. So we were able to perform a historical analysis, and we saw very important or significant evaluation of the urban area and the natural structures that were created after anthropic interventions and also natural interventions, and that evolution that marks and continues to mark the city or leave its mark on the city. We were able to establish diagnosis and saw that there was a significant lack of knowledge about the natural heritage in Esmeralda on the part of the people of Esmeralda themselves. So the risks and exposure to development and growth, and this allowed us to establish the map that we can see on the left. Perhaps this is easy to identify if you already know the map, but in 2030, the city has areas that are disappearing and other parts that are extending and then are more exposed to risk and contamination.
Como una herramienta.
So the PIB was created as a regulatory tool that is linked to the PUGS, the Plan for the Use of Soil, for it to be anchored in the territorial policy for the next few years. The process that we're following under the request of the UNDP was to establish a formal diagnosis to design the Green Infrastructure Plan. You can currently access that plan. It's on our website. It's on the website of the climate page. Unfortunately, this wasn't published in the program, but we did have a previous project for, or a kind of, previous project that talks about the problems of landslides with SBN, nature-based solutions. We did an analysis to see how we can integrate this plan in local regulation, identifying sources of funding, both public, at the public and private level. We've translated that into an ordinance, and the ordinance was approved at the beginning of this year. And then at the end, it was integrated in the PUGS that was being developed at the time, because the plan ended at the end of 2020. So the structure of the PIB is made up of strategies where we connect the city to biodiversity, we integrate climate and non-climate risk to ensure high quality of life and secure or make sure that the city is attractive at the socioeconomic level, with planning that generates synergy at the natural and urban level. We have 3 types of landscapes in that city. We have some plains that are mainly urban, and then we have a plain that can be flooded, and then another one that is urban, which is exposed to dangers in the city. We also established general intervention principles, the contention of extension in the urban areas, connection with natural green spaces, and integration of the urban spaces with green spaces and urban activities. At the urban level, we performed an analysis of the current or potential central areas that could be reinforced to help to structure the development of the city in urban areas or in that urban aspect, and thus avoid that uncontrolled development is fostered. And we reached this bank of PIV programs, so 6 programs that are divided into projects. So we have a program devoted to natural capital, the external part or area that we should protect, which is mainly in the hilly areas, Colinado, with an interesting forest. We also have another part that is aimed at the Rivieras, another is aimed at the islands in the center of the Esmeraldas River, where there are often floods, they're inhabited. There's another part that is an area of transition between the heritage site and also the urban site or area, and we have a completely urban area in the heart of the city where we work in the streets and the markets of the city. And there's another part that isn't territorial, and it's devoted to developing a green culture for the people of Esmeralda and an economy, a cultural economy, which makes use of that natural heritage of the city. So this is a list of the projects that you can find in the document that we have translated into multiple imaginary items that translate the kind of changes that each project and program can attract. This is an extract of the previous project for a specific area aimed at avoiding landslides, where we had some tragic events a few years ago, in which we used nature-based solutions to intervene in the mountains, establishing a base and also trying to secure better cooperation between urban and natural areas in these areas. This is a brief presentation of the tools, and we notified around 40 opportunities for funding, or mainly international projects that can be structuring, such as development banks, or of opportunities such as multilateral funds or foundations that come in to fund reforestation operations, protection operations, different conservation programs and programs linked to the environment. So there are many solutions like this that can be applied to Esmeraldas and other cities of Latin America. So that has become or being performed project by project with dates and scopes. An opportunity that we explored is collaboration with economic and strategic entities that do exist in Esmeraldas, particularly with public policies that manage strategic public infrastructure, and that are willing to collaborate in the environmental development of the city. Certain ones of them, or some of them, have funds So we started along a path for cooperation and synergy with these companies, between these companies, municipalities, and multilateral organizations such as the UNDP, to be able to join these programs to these funds that don't come from municipality receive funds. And we have final reflections. This is one of the first instruments of its kind for the department. It's not just aimed at natural areas, it's there to generate synergy between the natural and also urban planning, in this case in Esmeraldas.
que al ser una herramienta
And it was
súper
anchored to the PUGS, therefore it's highly structuring for the city, and it's come to secure the use, or at least the reference to the green infrastructure plan for the next years. We are now working on future action, but there's an interest in Esmeraldas for what is to come. It's truly a very interesting terrain. The PIV was approved. The ordinance for implementation was approved in March 2022. So I'm going to conclude with this image of the team that developed the PIV. It was a multidisciplinary team, and I will be here if you need to ask any questions. Thank you very much.
Nicolás, muchas gracias también a María Augusta y Verónica por estas tres presentaciones.
Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you, Maria Augusta and Veronica, for these very interesting presentations that show us what we can truly do with nature-based solutions, not just at the local level, but also with a much more comprehensive vision of the city. We have a few questions asked by the audience. I'd like to start with a question and I'd like all three of you to respond. We can start with Maria Augusta, then Veronica and Nicholas. And the question is by Diego Enrique. How do you consider the policy makers have contributed to this climate change plan? How easy or hard has it been to reach this commitment at the local level? At the high level, at the decision-making level. So we'll have Maria Augusta, then Veronica and Nicolas. Thank you, Sergio. Thank you for this question. Effectively, it is not an easy path. It's a path in which Quito has been building, since 2006. It wasn't achieved overnight. Within the different administrations and management bodies, first of all, we have performed a consolidation, in this case in the Environmental Secretariat, which is the local environmental body and has been accredited as such, where it has been developing a series of instruments that have been scaled up more so over time. And now we have this climate action plan that was elevated to the level of resolution within the Metropolitan Council, and the creation of a climate change committee, where you not only have the Environment Secretariat, but also other governing bodies, and it is presided over by the Mayor's Office, which in this case has a delegation that works that is a member of the council. So by arriving at this process has required a series of things, and I insist on that. First of all, collaboration and coordination within the local organization, then working on evidence that shows us the changes that we have had, and also the need for the transformation of the public policy until this has finally resulted in, this is a way of simply referring to it, obviously, but what we require is to make it, to mainstream it across all forms of management, and that's what we're working on right now. So, for example, our climate action plan considers that one of the sectors that produces the most emissions is the waste sector. What we have done is consolidate a number of plans and processes that we had already been working on in the municipality to create a comprehensive management plan for waste that has to be tested by the National Environmental Authority, and that can be acknowledged and recognized within the Metropolitan Council to avoid that the following administration once again rebuilds this process, and instead they can take this public policy as a roadmap that we can follow. So that's how we're doing. It's not easy to commit to it, but we have managed to build it based on this. And at present, we are additionally working not just based on a vision where we want to build policy, but also work within the citizens as such. So in Quito, in recent times, we have trained around 270 men and women leaders in the area of climate change in the metropolitan area, so we can implement it in our practical life and make climate change an everyday issue, so that we know and understand that our daily actions can have a positive or negative impact on it. And we've had interesting results there. So I think that the work performed jointly with the citizens and making sure that the environmental matters go beyond the competencies of the environmental area and taking it to other sectors, as Veronica has proposed, would be linked to greater productivity. We need to be involved in the economic, or this is linked to economy, this is linked to social matters, this is linked to violence, this is linked to gender, and environmental matters must be comprehensive, and only via the mainstreaming of climate change we will be able to make much more consistent decisions at the political level. I think we have to work on a process whereby those who are in public positions can adopt as a whole this topic, even though it doesn't necessarily gather votes, but they can really take ownership at the economic and every other level this matter. Thank you, Maria Augusta. Veronica, please. Thank you. Okay, I think the scenarios are similar in terms of challenges and also opportunities. Without a doubt, the political will of key actors is essential. As long as we have this political will, it will become an easier path. But I think the main part of all of this exercise is under the collective action of citizens. So we need to work bottom up to be able to boost adaptation and mitigation measures in a way that is much closer to local realities. So it's very hard, I believe, for it to be structured in the government, then to have consultation, then take them down to the people, to citizens. I think this is a much longer path. We think it should be the other way around. So we should build proposal and ideas and propose projects that are bottom up, so we can really boost the adoption of the same by local governments to be able to establish them. Since 2019, we have been working on this exercise, and I think it can be compared, as Maria Augusta said, because in reality, we have an instrument with standards for coordination now. We have an instrument that can work based on climate change and based on nature-based solutions that particularly assists the social aspect. And in this context, in parallel, we have created a circular economy business network, because we were a little bit biased in that area, but we're starting to integrate it, and we're looking at mechanisms so that we can address this jointly, so that these companies can also contribute to the sustainability of programs, for example, specifically in the area of conservation in the territory, and to strengthen these tools, which in first instance, as usual, are there to promote development, sustainable development, economically based for owners, but at the same time, they act as instruments for environmental education aimed at all the people in the kind of area. So in fact, it is a great way of providing integration. It has a very good perspective of citizens. What we'd like to do the most is make these proposals visible to strengthen impact on authorities, which is sometimes the most sensitive part with the issue of governance in this case, this environmental case, to be able to reach big decision makers, because the resources are really dependent on them. But I insist that the citizens
estas demandas a los gobiernos locales. Muchísimas
Should
gracias.
respond and motivate these demands towards the local government. Thank you very much. Yes, and in the case of Esmeraldas, it was very hard. This political topic was quite hard. We received the support of the municipality of the mayor, but she didn't really know what to do. It was a process that came from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and UNDP. There was a lack of dialogue between the prefecture, municipalities at the political level. So the support was hard to get support. We did find support in the municipalities. We found a team with few resources, but with a lot of willingness. So that really helped. And that was one of the main engines to be able to develop that PIV. And then surprisingly, there is a political level there that is quite fragmented. In Esmeraldas, there's a political level with public companies that manage the pipeline, port, and the refinery and some electric. So these big economic powers in the city that tend to respond to national policy, but they all have their own strategic plans and locally developed budgets with little connection to local policy. So going there with an external plan or neutral, politically speaking, allows us to establish dialogue on very specific projects, very apolitical projects, and it allows work with public policies that do have funding and the municipality as well, as such, to ensure that this is coordinated, which is something that was missing until now. And I'd like to make the most of this moment to respond answer to your other question, Diego, about how to improve the capabilities of local governments to design these kinds of proposals. And we also launched this call in the municipality so there can be intervention in the private sector for the private sector to get involved through contests with open calls, with public resources, so that all of these small companies, architectural companies, and young people that go abroad for training that come back with lots of training and great vision, so they can also enter the market and propose small public spaces and things. So it's really just a call to you as entities, public entities, to
en lista corta, pero abren la concurrencia y eso
stop shortlisting and to rather open up these contests so that we can build the competencies of everyone. And to also allow for experimentation. I think that's really important. So we were speaking to the team in Quito about these topics. There are a few local CBN references, the lack of knowledge of standards and other things. We can do a lot of design, for example. We're doing quite a lot of these. We're also learning from our mistakes. So we need to allow ourselves to experiment, and that can be done by working at a small scale and replicating prototypes and learning from those attempts to, bit by bit, consolidate what could be local standards.
para procesos de
And that
cartografía.
works for NBS, also for mapping processes, for landscape planning processes as well. There are lots of difficulties, and I think we need to allow ourselves to go step by step without trying to cover everything at the same time. So those are just some of our ideas based on our own experience. Okay, thank you very much, Nicolas, and thank you very much for responding the other question by Diego. Just to close, we have no more time, so I'm going to ask two more questions that we have in the chat. One for Veronica and one for Maria Augusta. I'd like to ask Veronica, because they were asking her when she did her presentation, how many areas and how much investment has all of the design and implementation of the conservation system demanded, the conservation system that you were showing us? Okay, would you like me to continue? Okay, so we have performed 8 years of conservation, close to 20 acres that have been established under this judicial safeguard, and it basically hasn't incurred in any external costs or consulting costs because the political will, which has been so significant, has complied with requirements that we have in standards at the moment as environmental bodies for responsible application. We also have a multidisciplinary team in the Directorate of Environmental Management. Therefore, we have had a very good team at the technical level to be able to comply with all needs within the framework of the creation of reports and ordinances that end up becoming a declaration of areas of conservation that we have right now. So that's a really important variable that we need to highlight. Because in public functions, when you bring together all these additional efforts, you can achieve all of these objectives in the short time and without resources beyond, let's say, any resources required to hire personnel, understanding that they fulfill a number of functions. So we've tried to be as efficient as possible as officers, and also I'd like to highlight the group of Nicholas that has been really committed and is really capable. They've been empowered along these topics, and that's really important in at the public level so it can continue to make sure that projects move forward. Thank you. Thank you very much, Veronica. Maria Augusta, we have the final question for you. It's linked to the first one. It's about Aluguilla and Calderon asks about the process of blue and green ordinances and how they would benefit native flora and fauna in this forest, because they are working for it towards it being declared as a protected area. And this is the last voice for the parish of Calderon. Yes, thank you, Gonzalez, for your question. We are evidently working on this and understand that it's parting from this base study and also discussion so that we can declare Fahnuguilla a protected area. So we're currently in that process, and obviously this is anchored in the Green and Blue Ordinance because it benefits in terms of providing a much wider legal framework that can add to and strengthen this declaration of natural areas that we already have in the Metropolitan District of Quito. So we've been working on these two processes in the Environment Secretariat in parallel. As you know, since 2010 or 2012, if I'm not wrong, Quito has declared its metropolitan system of protected areas. So the Green-Blue Ordinance, what it does is cover and gather many more elements to strengthen these kinds of systems, as well as all areas related to green and blue areas. So yes, they do complement each other, of course. And the benefit is that they provide protection at a much wider level, at the level of public policy. And we've been working on this report that I mentioned before, so that it can be part of the Metropolitan System of Protected Areas. Okay, thank you very much, Maria Augusta. Sorry, just to add one thing that I think is important as well. The Green and Blue Ordinance, what it seeks to do is clear the path and strengthen so that we can take this up to the National Environmental Authority and to strengthen and make sure that our protected areas in Quito can be incorporated into the national system. So we're also currently in that process, which implies greater action for the protection and conservation of these spaces. Excellent. Thank you very much to all three of you for your time, for your presentations, for answering questions. Thank you very much also to the attendees for asking questions. We've gone over by a few minutes. I'm going to just make a few recommendations so we can close the webinar. Our next webinar had already been introduced to us at the beginning. It's on the 24th of November at the same time.
Abordando el paso número 5 de la metodología, que será
we will be addressing step 5
serie de webinars el 9 de febrero.
Of the methodology. We'll be closing this series of webinars on the 9th of February. addressing steps 6 and 7, so monitoring, replicating, and scaling up. Additionally, where can you find videos of the webinars and other material that's being generated through the Node for Latin America and the Clever Cities project?
Encontrar todos los materiales.
You will find on the Cities with Nature YouTube page all the material and all the videos from the events and all the products that have been created with videos and graphics.
Los invitamos a que
And
diligencien
just to close, we'd like to invite you to fill in the survey that's going to be shared via a link in the chat. And we've also got the QR code so that you can answer a survey through which we seek to boost and improve some of the exercises that we've been performing. So we'd like to thank you. If you can take a few minutes to complete the survey so we can have the input and the feedback that we need from you. So without further ado, we'd like to thank you for your time. Thank you for staying a few more minutes and for being interested in this theme and for participating in this webinar. We hope to see you towards the end of November at the following webinar, and let's continue to stay in touch for future occasions. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you very much to all of the people who have accompanied us, to our panelists, colleagues, and attendees. Have a good day. Thank you, everybody. Take care.